The ballroom of Lady Havelock's London residence blazed with the light of 300 wax candles, their flames shivering each time a servant cracked a door. Jewels scattered the crowd like fallen stars, and the air sagged under the weight of perfume and whispered ambition. Near the towering arrangement of hothouse roses, a cluster of gentlemen in severe black coats laughed with the carelessness of those who believed themselves invulnerable. Miss Helena Whitmore stood just beyond the floral barricade, a forgotten glass of lemonade cooling in her gloved hand. She had not intended to eavesdrop. She had been retreating from a tedious conversation about lace trim when the Duke's voice stopped her blood. "I tell you, Linton, the quiet ones are the easiest," drawled the Duke of Ashford, Lucien St. Clair, his tone anointed with the confidence of a man who had never been denied. "Take the Whitmore girl, pinched mouth, nose always in a book. A few weeks of my attention and she'll be penning sonnets to my cravat." Laughter erupted, low and conspiratorial. Another voice, Lord Carrington, prodded, "You'd wager on it." 100 guineas. She'll be gazing at me like a moon-eyed calf before the season ends." Helena's fingers tightened on the glass stem. The candlelight seemed to dim, then sharpen. She did not gasp. She did not sway. Her mind, trained by years of managing her family's dwindling accounts and tutoring her younger sisters, catalogued the insult with surgical precision. The Duke had not bothered to lower his voice. He had not considered that his quarry might possess ears or a spine. She set her lemonade on a passing tray and walked around the flowers. Lucien St. Clair had the sort of face that made sensible women forget their own names, a strong jaw, eyes the gray of winter smoke, a mouth that curved with lazy entitlement. He was leaning against a pillar, entirely at ease, when he noticed her approach. The shift in his expression was almost imperceptible, a flicker of surprise, quickly mastered, replaced by the charming smile he deployed like a footman opening a door. "Miss Whitmore," he said, straightening, "what a pleasure, I was just—" "I heard you," she said. Her voice was not raised. It carried no tremor. It was simply a statement, as unadorned as a ledger entry. The gentlemen around him froze. Carrington's face drained of amusement. Linton studied the ceiling with sudden, intense fascination. The Duke's smile held, but the muscles beneath it tightened. "I beg your pardon," he managed. Helena met his eyes without flinching. "Your wager, your Grace. 100 guineas that I would become your moon-eyed calf before the season's close. I believe those were your words." She allowed a pause to settle, heavy as a stone dropped into still water. "I would not trouble yourself. The odds are exceedingly poor." She did not wait for a reply. She turned and walked through the crowd, which parted without knowing why, sensing only that something seismic had occurred. Her heart beat a fierce rhythm against her ribs, but her back remained straight, her chin level. She collected her aunt, pleaded a headache, and departed in a hired hackney before the Duke could marshal his wits. Left behind, Lucien St. Clair stood rooted to the parquet floor. The laughter of his friends had died. Lady Havelock's ball continued its swirl, but for him the music had warped into a discordant hum. He had been cut, not with a blade but with a precision that left no blood yet wounded something deeper than pride. The Whitmore girl had looked at him as though he were a smear on a windowpane, easily dismissed. He should have laughed it off, made a jest about bluestockings and their lack of humor. Instead, he found himself staring at the door through which she had vanished. The sensation coiling in his chest was unfamiliar. Not anger, not shame exactly. It felt dangerously close to respect, and that unsettled him more than any public set-down ever could. 100 guineas, he thought. He had wagered on a woman's heart and been called a fool in front of half the ton without her ever raising her voice. The story would be all over London by breakfast. He signaled for a brandy and drained it swiftly. The burn did nothing to dispel the image of Helena Whitmore's steady gaze or the uncomfortable certainty that, for the first time in his adult life, he had met someone who saw him clearly and found him wanting. 3 days later, the first bouquet arrived at the narrow Whitmore townhouse on Baker Street. Roses, blood-red and ostentatious, tied with a silver ribbon. The card bore a ducal crest and a single line, with sincere apologies. A. Helena read it at the breakfast table while her aunt, Mrs. Pretty, fluttered like a moth at a lamp. From the Duke of Ashford. Helena, you must receive him when he calls. This is the most astonishing turn of fortune. It is a turn of strategy, Helena said, setting the card aside. He cannot bear to lose his wager. She allowed the bouquet to remain in the hall, where it would be seen by visitors, but she sent no reply. When Ashford called that afternoon, she received him in the cramped drawing-room with the threadbare carpet, offering tea with the same distant courtesy she would extend to a tradesman. He was dressed immaculately, his coat a deep blue that made his eyes appear almost silver. He attempted lightness. I feared you might refuse to see me. My aunt would never permit such rudeness to a duke. She poured with steady hands. Sugar. No, thank you. Miss Whitmore, I came to apologize properly. The wager was boorish beyond excuse. I spoke without thought, and you bore the insult with a dignity that shames me. The words were finely crafted. Helena took a sip of her own tea. You rehearsed that. A flicker of something, annoyance, admiration, crossed his features. I did. Does that diminish its sincerity? It leaves the question of motivation unanswered. He set down his cup with a clink. You are determined to think the worst of me. I am determined to think accurately, Your Grace. A man who wagers on a woman's affections is a man who views affection as currency. I have no interest in being coin. He had no ready response. The silence stretched, taut as a violin string. Then he smiled, a wry, unexpected thing that softened the arrogance. You are the most unnerving woman I have ever met. I shall take that as a compliment. He departed with promises to call again, and he did, 3 times in the following week. Each visit, Helena dissected his conversation with surgical calm. At a musicale hosted by Lady Featherstone, she asked his opinion on Cecilia, a novel she knew had recently scandalized the lending libraries. He extemporized wildly, praising its moral fortitude and delicate prose, until she mentioned that the book was in fact a satire of moral pretension. The surrounding guests tittered behind fans. Ashford's jaw tightened, but he recovered with a laugh that did not quite reach his eyes. You have made your point, Miss Whitmore. I am not a reader of novels. Then you should not pretend to be, Your Grace. Pretension is the most tiresome of vices. Later, she overheard him speaking to Carrington in the card room. His voice was low, stripped of its usual polish. She's not like the others. She sees through everything. It's a cursed, refreshing challenge. A challenge. The word landed in her stomach like a stone. She had hoped foolishly that his persistence might contain a seed of genuine feeling. But a challenge was still a game, and she was still the quarry. Her resolve hardened into something cold and immovable. That night she sat at her writing desk and composed a letter to her cousin in Bath, inquiring about a long-term visit. Then she opened the leather-bound journal where she recorded her observations of the world and began to sketch a plan. The Duke of Ashford wished to play games. Very well. She would play one he could not win, and when he fell, he would fall not because she pushed him, but because his own hubris had built the cliff. She dipped her quill and wrote a single line, "Find the flaw in the pillar." The hunt had begun, but she was no longer the prey. Lord Pemberton was a baron of modest fortune and immoderate kindness. He had thinning brown hair, a scholar's stoop, and eyes that held genuine warmth when they settled on Helena at Lady Breckenridge's garden party. He did not bring flowers or deliver rehearsed apologies. He brought her a volume of botanical engravings he thought she might enjoy, and when she spoke, he listened as though her words were maps to uncharted lands. Ashford, watching from across the lawn, felt something twist behind his ribs. Pemberton had no right to stand so close to her, to make her smile that quiet, unguarded smile. He excused himself from a conversation about crop rotation and cut a path through the rose arbors. Miss Whitmore, Pemberton. His tone was clipped. A fine afternoon. Pemberton inclined his head, unruffled. Ashford, we were just discussing the Linnean classification system. Miss Whitmore has fascinating insights on native wildflowers. I'm sure she does. The Duke's gaze remained fixed on Helena. Might I beg a moment of your time? She excused herself from Pemberton with a gracious nod and followed Ashford to a stone bench near the ornamental pond. The water reflected gray sky and the slender silhouettes of willow branches. She sat, folding her hands in her lap, and waited. Why do you treat me like a contagion? His voice was rougher than he intended. I have apologized. I have called. I have. You have performed the rituals of courtship with admirable diligence, she said, but I do not require a performance. Then what do you require? Honesty. She looked at him directly. I heard every word of your wager, your grace. I heard the laughter. I heard the sum. 100 guineas. Tell me, what is the current market price of my heart? Has it appreciated? He recoiled as though struck. That was before I knew you. And now you know me, and I am a refreshing challenge. I heard that as well at Lady Featherstone's. You have a gift for being overheard. Color rose along his cheekbones. He opened his mouth, closed it. The pond lapped gently against its stone border. A gardener trimmed hedges in the distance, the rhythmic snip-snip a counterpoint to their silence. I do not know how to convince you that my feelings have altered, he said finally. Everything I say you dissect, every gesture you interpret as strategy. Because it is strategy. You are a man who has never been refused. I am a puzzle you cannot solve. The moment I yielded, you would lose interest and move to the next unsolved thing. He reached for her hand and she withdrew it sharply. The rejection stung him visibly. That is a cruel assessment. It is an accurate one. Before he could respond, hurried footsteps approached. Lady Danworth, a widow with a serpent's instinct for weak points, appeared on the path with 2 companions. Her smile was vinegar-sweet. Miss Whitmore, how cozy you look. First Pemberton, now the Duke. You do collect admirers like bonnet ribbons. Helena rose. Lady Danworth, your talent for observation is matched only by your talent for intrusion. The widow's eyes narrowed. Careful, my dear. A woman of your precarious position should not make enemies. The exchange rippled outward through the party. By evening, the story had mutated. Helena Whitmore, the penniless bluestocking, was playing 2 gentlemen against each other with calculated cunning. The whispers followed her into supper, clung to her like smoke. Ashford heard them. At the following evening's ball, as Helena entered alone, Pemberton detained by a family matter, the currents of gossip swirled visibly. She walked through them with her head high, but Ashford saw the tightness around her mouth. He acted without thinking. Striding to the center of the room, he raised his voice just enough to cut through the music. I wish to address the unworthy rumors circulating about Miss Whitmore. She is a lady of unimpeachable character, and any person who suggests otherwise will answer to me. The room fell still. Faces turned. Helena's expression froze, then darkened with a fury he had never seen. She did not look grateful. She looked betrayed. She walked to him, not waiting for the whispers to resume, and spoke in a tone that carried to no one else. You have just announced to everyone that I require a man to defend my honor. You have made me a damsel in a story of your own writing. I did not ask for a champion. I asked to be left in peace. She turned and walked out, past the astonished guests, past the footmen, into the cool night where her carriage waited. Ashford stood alone in the ballroom's glare, the weight of his mistake pressing down like a stone lintel. He had meant to protect her. Instead, he had proven her point. His every action, however well-intentioned, was still about him. He had never hated himself more. The documents arrived at Helena's townhouse in a plain wrapper, sent by a former tutor now lecturing at Oxford. She had written to him weeks ago, inquiring about the Duke of Ashford's much-publicized venture, the Eastern Star Shipping Company, which he had funded and promoted as a model of ethical commerce. The tutor's reply was thick with evidence. Testimonies from sailors, port records, manifests listing wages that amounted to pennies. The ships flew a British flag, but operated under conditions that mirrored the worst excesses of the slave trade. Helena read every page by candlelight. Her hands did not shake. She did not weep for the suffering described. She absorbed the information with the same methodical focus she applied to a difficult translation, and when she finished, she knew she held the instrument of Ashford's exposure. Lord Pemberton, who admired her mind and asked no intrusive questions, secured her an invitation to the parliamentary dinner at the Guildhall. It was a staid affair of roast beef and claret, attended by ministers, merchants, and peers who fancied themselves reformers. Ashford sat near the head of the table, resplendent in black velvet, receiving compliments on his shipping enterprise. Helena waited. She had learned patience in drawing rooms where her opinion was not solicited, in ballrooms where she was invisible. She could wait a little longer. The conversation turned, as she had calculated it would, to the question of labor in the colonies. A portly MP from Liverpool was holding forth on the necessity of competitive wages when Helena spoke, her voice clear and unassuming. "My lord, I wonder if you might clarify a point. The Eastern Star Company, which His Grace champions, claims to pay its seamen a fair wage. Yet I have read accounts suggesting the sum is 6 pence a day, with rations deducted. Is that considered competitive?" The table quieted. Ashford's glass paused halfway to his lips. The MP frowned, turning to the Duke. "Ashford, what is this?" The Duke set down his glass. "I am certain there has been some misunderstanding. My managers assured me." "Then your managers have deceived you," Helena said, still in that calm, carrying tone. "The manifests from the Minerva and the Good Hope show wages below subsistence. The captains are authorized to flog for minor infractions. 3 men died on the last crossing from Calcutta and were buried at sea without ceremony or notice to their families." A heavy silence filled the hall. Someone coughed. A minister adjusted his cravat. Ashford's face had gone the color of old parchment. He did not bluster or deny. He stared at Helena, and in that stare she saw the terrible dawn of comprehension. He had not known, but ignorance for a man of his power was its own indictment. "Is this true?" Lord Grenville, the Home Secretary, directed the question at Ashford like a gavel. I was not aware of these specifics," Ashford said, "but I will investigate immediately. If these abuses exist, they will be remedied at my personal cost." The damage was done. The whispers began before the last course was cleared. The Duke of Ashford, the enlightened reformer, had been exposed as either a hypocrite or a fool, and to the ton, the distinction was negligible. Later, Helena stood in the Guildhall's small garden, breathing air that tasted of damp stone and night-blooming jasmine. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. He stopped several feet away, as though uncertain of his welcome. "You did not do that from malice," he said. His voice was hoarse. "You did it because those men deserved a voice." She turned. His face was drawn, stripped of its polished veneer. "You are not angry with me." "I am angry with myself. I signed papers without reading them. I trusted men because they spoke well at dinner. I was so busy being the Duke of Ashford that I forgot to be a decent human being." He drew a breath. "I owe you thanks. It is a bitter gift, but I will not refuse it." Helena studied him. There was no trace of the arrogant lord who had wagered on her heart. This man was humbled, cracked open, and for a fleeting moment she felt something loosen in her own chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but the recognition of courage. "What will you do?" she asked. "Dismantle it, rebuild it, make it what I should have built in the first place." He met her eyes. "I will not ask for your good opinion. I have done nothing to earn it, but I will work until I do." He turned and walked back into the Guildhall, leaving her alone with the jasmine and the distant strains of a string quartet. She realized she was holding her breath and released it slowly. The pillar had cracked, but it had not crushed him. Instead, he had chosen to rebuild from the rubble. Something dangerous stirred in her heart. a feeling she had not permitted herself in years. Hope, the Duke of Ashford, vanished from London's social circuit. His townhouse in Grosvenor Square remained shuttered. His box at the opera stayed empty. In his absence, the Tun speculated wildly. He had fled to the continent in disgrace. He had been seized by a fit of madness. He was hiding from creditors. The truth was less theatrical but more remarkable. He had traveled to Bristol and Liverpool, meeting with ship captains and dockworkers, poring over ledgers by lamplight, and dismissing the managers who had poisoned his enterprise. His letters to Helena, written on plain paper without crest or flourish, arrived at intervals, each one a chronicle of small victories and stubborn setbacks. I have secured new contracts for the seamen. The wages are still not what they should be, but they are a beginning. The captain of the Minerva has been relieved of command. I testified before the Admiralty Board yesterday. It was terrifying. I did it anyway. Helena read them in the window seat of her bedchamber, the morning light falling across the ink. She did not reply, but she kept the letters in a drawer lined with lavender, and sometimes she reread them before sleep. Lord Pemberton proposed on a Tuesday afternoon, in the genteel confines of her aunt's drawing-room. He was nervous, endearingly so, his prepared speech tumbling out in a rush. I can offer you a comfortable home, respect, and a library of considerable size. I would never ask you to be less than you are. It was, by any measure, an excellent offer. Helena looked at his kind, earnest face and felt a wave of affection unaccompanied by any tremor of the heart. She asked for a fortnight to consider. He granted it with grace, and she did not miss the sadness that flickered behind his smile. He knew, perhaps, what she was only beginning to admit to herself. The country house party at Thornfield Court was the first occasion Ashford and Helena had been in the same room since the Guildhall. She saw him across the drawing-room before dinner and almost did not recognize him. He was thinner. The arrogance had been planed away, leaving sharper angles and a gravity that sat strangely on his features. When he spoke to other guests, he listened more than he talked. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. He sought her out in the conservatory after the meal, amid ferns and the sweet perfume of lemon trees. "You received my letters." It was not a question. She inclined her head. "I did." "And you chose not to respond. That is your right." He paused. "I am not here to press my suit. I am here to tell you that I understand now. The wager was not merely thoughtless, it was cruel. It reduced you to an object, and I have no excuse that can erase it. But I am grateful that you exposed the shipping company, because it forced me to see how much of my life had been built on surfaces." He looked down at his hands. "I was a fool in more ways than one." "Yes," she said softly, "you were." He flinched, then nodded. "I will always be grateful that you did not pretend otherwise." They walked among the lemon trees in silence, and something shifted, not a dramatic rift, but a quiet realignment, like the settling of a foundation after years of strain. She found herself telling him about her father's debts, the years of scraping by, the way she had learned to disappear in rooms full of wealthier, louder people. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said, "You have never been invisible. You only made them think so you could see them more clearly." That night Helena lay awake, staring at the canopy above her bed. The thaw she had resisted for so long was underway, and it frightened her. Love, she had always believed, was a surrender, but perhaps it could also be a choice, made with open eyes and a clear mind. The next morning, Lady Danworth's latest poison seeped through the house party. A rumor, whispered with theatrical sympathy, accused Helena of orchestrating the Guildhall exposure as calculated revenge for the wager. "She planned it all," the widow murmured over breakfast. "She baited him into public humiliation, a very cold creature." By luncheon, the guests regarded Helena with wary curiosity. Ashford found her in the library, her composure intact but her hands tightly clasped. "I will handle this," he said. "You cannot fight every battle for me." "I can fight this one. It was my folly that gave her ammunition." He hesitated, then said, "I know you are capable of defending yourself, but allow me the privilege of standing beside you, not in front, beside." She looked at him, really looked, past the titles and the charm and the arrogance that had once defined him. What she saw was a man who had been broken and was still rebuilding, brick by stubborn brick. She nodded once. He left the library with a purposeful stride, and Helena understood that whatever happened next, she was no longer alone in the fight. The investigation took Ashford 4 days. He traced the rumor to its source, a lady's maid who had been generously compensated by Lady Danworth to carry twisted fragments of truth between households. He obtained a sworn statement, presented it to Lady Danworth's brother, a baronet with political aspirations, and suggested that a public retraction might prevent an embarrassing legal matter. The widow issued a terse, humiliated apology in the Morning Post, claiming a misunderstanding. Society absorbed the correction with the voraciousness of sharks sensing blood elsewhere. Ashford did not publicize his role. He returned to Thornfield Court on a gray afternoon, mud-spattered from the ride, and found Helena walking alone in the rose garden. The autumn blooms were fading, their petals edged with brown, but the air still carried a ghost of summer sweetness. "It is done," he said. "Lady Danworth will trouble you no more." "I heard," she looked at him. "You did not need to do it so quietly. Most men would have made a spectacle of their vindication." "I am trying to be less like most men." They walked to a stone bench beneath an arbor. The sky pressed down, heavy with unshed rain. Helena spoke first, her voice steady but low. "When I heard your wager, I wanted to destroy you. Not merely embarrass you, destroy you. I planned the Guildhall moment for weeks. I told myself it was justice for those sailors, and it was, but it was also revenge. I am not the saint you seem to think me." Ashford absorbed this without flinching. "I know." "You know." "I guessed. The question you asked at the dinner was too precise, too perfectly aimed. You had prepared it." He turned to face her. "It does not change what I feel. You acted from anger, but also from principle. You could have chosen a far more vicious path, and you did not. You gave me the truth and let me decide what to do with it. That was a strange kind of mercy." She stared at the brown-tinged roses. "You are not the man who made that wager." "No, you are the reason I am not." The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering on the arbor's leaves. Neither of them moved. Ashford reached for her hand, and she let him take it. His fingers were warm and rough from riding, and they closed around hers with a gentleness that made her throat tighten. "I am not asking for your heart today," he said. "I am asking for the chance to earn it over a lifetime if necessary. I have learned that love is not a wager, and you are not a prize. You are the most remarkable person I have ever known, and I would rather spend my years proving that than walk away now." The rain intensified, drumming on the arbor. Helena felt the walls she had built around herself, walls of pride, of self-protection, of justified anger, begin to dissolve. She leaned toward him, and when he kissed her, it was not a conquering but a question. She answered it by not pulling away. That evening, at the house party's final ball, Ashford asked the company for a moment of their attention. The musicians paused. The dancers stilled. He stood in the center of the room, Helena at his side, and spoke clearly. "I wish to state publicly that Miss Helena Whitmore is a woman of extraordinary integrity and courage. Any slight upon her character is a slight upon mine, and I will answer it accordingly. I hold her in the highest esteem, and I am honored that she permits my company." It was not a proposal. It was something braver, a declaration of respect without expectation of return. The room rustled with surprise, then murmured approval. Helena felt the weight of 100 gazes and found she did not mind them. She was seen, finally, not as a bluestocking or a fortune hunter or a victim, but as herself. Later she found Ashford in the library, staring into the fire. She closed the door softly. "You did not need to make that speech." "I needed to, for me." He looked at her. "I wanted the world to know that I am proud to know you, regardless of what comes next." She crossed the room and stood before him. "What comes next," she said, is that I would like to begin again, not as a challenge or a wager, as two people who have seen each other at our worst and choose to move forward anyway." He rose, and this time when he kissed her, there was no hesitation. The fire crackled, the rain streamed down the windows, and the world outside the library ceased to matter. When they parted, his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "I was the greatest fool in England," he murmured. "You were," she agreed, "but you are my fool now, and I find I am rather attached to you." He laughed, a broken, joyful sound, and drew her close. The journey had been long and thorned, but it had led them here, to a quiet room and a quiet promise, and it was enough. Vauxhall Gardens shimmered under a canopy of lanterns, their colored glass casting jewel-toned light across the gravel paths and the laughing crowds. It was the final royal gala of the season, and all of London seemed to have converged on the pleasure gardens to eat paper-thin ham, drink cold punch, and watch the fireworks that would erupt at midnight. The orchestra played Handel from the bandstand, and the Grand Walk buzzed with silk and scandal. Helena walked on the Duke of Ashford's arm, her gown a deep green that made her eyes luminous. She had chosen the color herself, rejecting her aunt's suggestion of pale blue. Green was the shade of growing things, of life pushing through winter soil. It suited her mood. They had been inseparable for 3 weeks, attending the theater, riding in Hyde Park, sitting together in her aunt's drawing room while he read aloud from the books he had once pretended to know. The Ton had watched this progression with hungry eyes, waiting for an announcement. Helena had been in no hurry. She was learning to trust not just him, but herself, her own judgment, her own desires. Tonight, however, there was something different in Ashford's bearing. He was attentive but distracted, his eyes scanning the gardens as though looking for something specific. He steered her away from the crowded pavilions, toward the quieter paths near the grand fountain, where water cascaded over marble tiers and the air was cool with spray. "I have a question," he said, stopping beneath a lantern-strung tree, "that I have been waiting to ask for what feels like a lifetime." Helena's heart quickened, but her voice remained steady. "Then ask it." He reached into his coat and produced a ring, not a flashy diamond, but an emerald set in gold, the stone deep and clear as forest light. "This belonged to my grandmother. She was a woman of fierce intelligence and even fiercer opinions. My grandfather used to say she saved him from a life of mediocrity by refusing to tolerate his nonsense." He smiled, a little unsteadily. "I rather think she would have liked you." Helena looked at the ring, then at him. The arrogance that had once defined him was entirely absent. In its place was something far more compelling, an open, uncertain, hopeful man. "Helena Whitmore," he said, "you proved me a fool in front of the entire world, and it was the greatest gift I have ever received. I have no wagers left in me, no games. Only the certainty that my life is brighter, deeper, and infinitely better with you in it. Will you marry me?" The fountain splashed. The distant orchestra reached a crescendo. Somewhere beyond the trees, laughter rose and fell. Helena felt the enormity of the moment settle over her like a cloak, and for the first time in her life, she did not analyze or dissect it. She simply felt. "Yes," she said, "I will." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He looked at her as though she had hung the moon and all the stars, and then he kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of promises beyond words. When they returned to the main pavilion, the news spread like fire through dry grass. The ring on Helena's finger was unmistakable, and the Duke's expression left no room for doubt. Lady Danworth, holding court near the punch bowl, turned a shade of puce that did not suit her complexion. Lord Pemberton approached, his smile touched with melancholy but genuine. "Congratulations, Miss Whitmore, Ashford." He shook the Duke's hand. "You are a fortunate man." "I am aware," Ashford said, "every single day." The fireworks began at midnight, bursting overhead in showers of gold and crimson. Helena stood with her betrothed, his arm around her waist, and watched the sky bloom and fade. She thought of the ballroom where she had first heard his careless words, the drawing rooms where she had dismantled his pretensions, the garden where she had seen him break and begin to mend. She had never wept. She had never begged. She had simply stood her ground, and in doing so, she had taught a foolish duke what it meant to be a worthy man. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "What are you thinking?" She smiled. "I am thinking that you were the most arrogant, insufferable, foolish man I ever met. And now you are my arrogant, insufferable, foolish man, and I would not trade you for any other." He laughed, and the sound was bright as the fireworks, and they turned together to face the future, which stretched before them not as a wager or a conquest but as a shared journey, built on honesty, resilience, and a love that had been earned one hard-won moment at a time.